what are some of the myths, and those myths are obviously based on narratives, that we, and I'm speaking about girls or women, but certainly the flip side of that coin is the expectations of the men. If the girls are taught the myths, then they have their own expectations and then the expectations of the men. And I think that it's important to look at the narratives that we're taught from a young age that repeat themselves into our psyche over time at our communal table, weekly, or very often. You already heard both of the earlier speakers refer to bashert, which we throw around loosely and everyone interprets it differently, but it's just part of the Jewish lexicon. So I wanted to say that in Judaism, a huge and central idea in Judaism, a mythological idea, is sacrifice. There's this idea of sacrifice and martyrdom. It's a central piece of our tefillah on Yom Kippur, right? The 10 martyrs. The idea of martyrdom is very central to Judaism. The idea of sacrifice is very central to Judaism. Those subtly make their way into our minds through the stories that we're told about how did Jewish marriages work, how did mating and dating work, and then what happened in the marriage structure itself. A lot of it involves sacrifice and martyrdom. And I want to talk about those ideas. Did it work? Did sacrifice and martyrdom work? And if it didn't, what did we do with it? And is there perhaps a different model? Or do we reread our narratives and our models and try to see that there's something beyond the sacrifice and beyond the martyrdom? And I want to introduce the idea, and we'll weave through it as I go through the sources. In modern psychology today, it's sort of a new idea. The doctor previously had said, you have to love yourself first. You have to go out there and you have to be a happy person and you have to love yourself first. That is absolutely true. You absolutely need to love yourself first. You can't expect someone else to love you if you don't love yourself. And so therefore, I want to offer and suggest the following. This idea, and we'll talk about it shortly, and I'll go through the sources idea, that's been very much ingrained in our Jewish psyche, but just as well in our secular general psyche, if you listen to the music that's blaring, this idea of two halves coming together, that you're not whole or complete until you meet the person. That idea is central to how we date and how we perceive the person we're dating and how we perceive the person we are marrying and how we perceive the person we are married to. That somehow they complete us. All the secular music speaks about this. I was a half until I met you. I need you. You complete me. These ideas actually originate in Judaism in a lot of our texts. So I want to start out by reading the very first narrative that we have in Judaism, and that is the narrative of Genesis, of Bereshit. What was God's plan when God actually wanted us to date and mate and end up being married? So the plan that we always understood is the following in Genesis 1. God says, I need to make man in my image. Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam b'tzelmeinu. And then he goes ahead and announces, Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzelmo, right? He created man in his image. B'tzelem Elokim bara otam, zachar u'nekeva bara otam. God created man in his image, and when God created man in his image, he created them, male and female. What's the first object of this wedding, of this marriage? Pulvu, you should procreate. Umilu et haaretz, and fill up this land with humanity. And then v'chivsha, right? And you should subdue it, and you should subdue all the animals. So the plan, according to God, is you should find someone, right? I'm sorry, not you should find someone. I created man and woman. He blesses them, and they should procreate. Now, when we get into the actual story that takes place, that's God's sort of announcement. But we get into the actual story of what begins to transpire, the story changes. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam, God creates, in verse 7 in chapter 2, God creates man from the earth, and he imbues in man, she imbues in man a soul. Man looked around. Man, we are social animals. Man was looking for company, right? He looked among the animals and did not find company to his liking. And he was alone. And so God is going to create some sort of creation similar to man out of man. And we all know the story. It's important to refresh the story now that we're going to reread it. ויאמר האדם in verse 23, כ"ג, ויאמר האדם זאת הפעם עצם מעצמי ובשר מבשרי לזאת יקרא אישה כי מאיש לקחה זאת. And so man, this time, not God, man decides to name this creation that he's been gifted with, and he names her woman. And then pasuk, the classic pasuk that we're going to look at, pasuk chaf-daled, על כן יעזוב איש את אביו ואת אמו, ודבק באשתו, והיו לבשר אחד. Now this is God talking again. This is the narrator. This is not man. The proclamation is, and so therefore man should leave mother and father, and should stick to his wife, and should become one flesh. Now they joked before that man had no in-laws, but actually God is a pretty serious in-law. And it's God claiming that he needs to leave his mother and father, and he should cling to his wife, which is really in effect what he did. He got into trouble for that. But anyways, so here we have the first myth in many ways. And I say myth not at all to disparage the Torah, but the myth and what it does to us subconsciously. And that is this idea that we become one. And in truth, instead of two halves coming together, honestly, it needs to be two wholes coming together. It can't be two halves. Let's see what happens to God's plan. Because God is the one that stated man leaves his parents and sticks to his wife, and they become one flesh. That was God proclaiming that. So now let's see what happens when man chooses and God doesn't choose, when man acts. So what happens? So if they should be one flesh, then we can surmise that if the goal is to become one flesh, that there must be great joy in these two people coming together. But what happens in the first verse in chapter 3 after they've now been together and become one flesh? והנחש היה ערום מכל חיית השדה. The snake was naked from all the other animals, אשר עשה השם אלוקים, which God created, ויאמר אל האישה. And he says to the woman, אף כי אמר אלוקים, לא תאכלו מכל עץ הגן. And he turns to the woman and he says, has God said that we should not eat from this tree? But what do we see here? If they were to be one flesh and they were to complete each other, why is she wandering in the garden and looking for other social experiences if he completed her? She's wandering, she's looking for something else. And I don't know if any of you have read Aviva Zornberg's book about the beginning of desire, but in many ways, the wandering in the Garden of Eden represents a lack of desire being fulfilled. So here they are one, they've come together, but she's wandering. And she's wandering and she's open to conversation with someone else. And then we see the conversation and we know the conversation, and he gets her to eat from the tree. She says, no, we're not allowed to eat from the tree. He says, no, you're not going to die if you eat from the tree. It's okay. What's going to happen to you is that your eyes are going to open up and knowledge will become available to you. And so he offers her things that, what can we say but that she somehow doesn't have from her marital experience. He's offering her things that she does not have from this become one flesh idea. And so she goes ahead and eats, and her eyes do in fact open up, meaning with knowledge. She gets a different perspective, and she shares it with her husband, and suddenly they hear the voice of God, and he says to her, here's your punishment for not having listened to me. To bear children, it will be with a lot of pain. You'll desire your husband. He will rule over you. And then to the man he says, Ule'adam amal, כי שמעת לקול אשתך ותאכל מן העץ, because you listened to your wife and you ate from the tree. ארורה האדמה בעבורך, בעצבון תאכלנה כל ימי חייך. He says the earth will be cursed under you, meaning you'll have to work really hard to get at it. To eat will be difficult. בזיעת אפיך תאכל לחם, the famous pasuk 19. It's going to be hard for you to get to that bread. It's going to be with a lot of hard labor and work. But what you see what happened actually after they sin, that's really where the excitement begins. That's where there's passion. That's where there's feeling. That's where you hear about what they're going to have to do in order to live this life. And they're going to each have to do something apart from one another. They're each kind of getting a job. And they're each going to have to do something separate from one another, and something that involves their whole full selves and all of their feelings and all of their energies. And if you notice, Adam's reaction to it is that he names his wife a new name. He names her Chava. If you look at Pasuk Chaf, Vayikra Adam Shem Ishto Chava, Ki Hayta Em Kol Chai. He renames her. Somehow, through the punishment, a lot of desire and a lot of passion actually comes through. And then finally, when the next chapter begins, chapter 4, Pasuk Aleph, V'Adam yada et Chava ishto. And now Adam knows his wife, and she, meaning he's intimate with her, she becomes pregnant, she has her first child, she names the child toward God. She gives the child a name as an expression toward God. What do we see here? The story that always told us, V'davak beishto v'ayu lebasar echad, that when God introduced this whole idea of humanity and man and woman and coming together and marriage and dating and mating, we're going to become this one glue, this one piece, this wholeness of two halves. But in reality, that's not at all how the story plays out. The coming together actually happens because of each one of them having their own roles and their own productive lives and their own sense of meaning. Because when they were together in verse 24, right, nothing happened except for her looking for something else. She starts talking to the snake. She's searching for meaning. She's searching for desire. She's searching for interest, but she's not satisfied from being in this one relationship and meeting her other half. The interesting things happen after they've been punished, in which they've been told that they each have this role, meaning they've actually now been given meaning for life. They've each been given a reason to live. She's going to birth children. He has to somehow find bread. So in fact, it wasn't so great to be born with a silver spoon in his mouth. To be born into the Garden of Eden, it could get pretty boring. There's not a lot of meaning. It gets really exciting when meaning is put into your life, when you have to do something, when you have to become a whole on your own. And so here, now he has to find meaning, he has to find bread, he has to make the earth work for him. She has to have a child. Hearing that, that's when he comes to be with his wife. That's when the sex happens, is when after the sin, after the punishment, after they each realize that there's a reason for each one of them to live. Roaming in the Garden of Eden without a real reason of why they're living doesn't give them the passion, the desire that actually brings them into that oneness. It's a dictated oneness, but it's not something that's human-driven. It's God-ordained. But we, in our psychology and our culture, get stuck on the God-ordained. And we think, we got to meet the other half, because that's how I'm going to become whole again. And this idea carries itself throughout the Tanakh and Talmud. Of course, I just want to get the ideas into your head. You'll think of your own ideas and narratives that you've learned and read and spoken about in your past. But here I brought the Gemara that the two speakers prior to me mentioned. So I'm now on the third page of the sources. The Babylonian Talmud, the famous Gemara in Sotah Bet, which is the Gemara that we all throw around very flippantly about the bashert, which solidifies this idea of meeting your other half. It solidifies the idea. Why? because Rabbi Bar Chana says, Rabbi Yochanan said, and the difficulty of matching couples is as that of the splitting of the sea, right? And then it quotes a pasuk from Psalms, from Tehillim, how it's so difficult, but it's like releasing someone from prison when they finally meet the other half. Rav said, 40 days before the formation of a fetus, a heavenly voice emanates and says, the daughter of so-and-so will be matched to so-and-so, the house of so-and-so and so-and-so, and the field of so-and-so to so-and-so. It isn't a difficulty, meaning the question among the rabbis is, why was it mentioned twice? One refers to the first match, the other refers to the second match. So in Judaism, you're only allowed to get married twice. So what happened here with this famous Gemara that we latched onto socially, theologically, communally? We have latched onto this. We all know the plays and the songs and the jokes about the bashert. But even though we know the plays and the songs and the jokes, we can't let go of it psychologically that we're going to meet this other half. And what happens, I mean, frankly, halacha doesn't even consider, you can abort a fetus 40 days before. So the rabbis have said that prior to even what we halachically hold to be a life, you're already preordained, you've already been set up with this other half. That puts so much import on the fact that you're searching for this other half, for this predestined person. And that keeps us in a very stuck place, actually. And the one love story in the Tanakh that we do get to see play itself out, the passionate love story of the preordained. I meet her, I fell in love with her, I knew it was immediate, it was right away, done, is Rachel and Yaakov. The story of Rachel and Yaakov, it reads like a movie script. Pasuk Tet, he's still speaking with the other shepherds, right? He's reaching his mother's homeland. He comes to the big well, which was the gathering place socially in ancient times because people needed water. He comes to the well, and he's speaking to the other shepherds about, do you know Lavan? And there is Rachel. And you could just see the movie scene happening. Pasuk Yud, Vayihi kasher ra'a Yaakov et Rachel. He lifts his eyes. He sees this woman coming, Bat Lavan, Achi imo, his niece, Ve'etzon Lavan Achi imo, and he sees that it's a well-off family. Vayigash Yaakov, and he gets supernatural powers because of his passion, and he's able to remove what it would take many shepherds to do, and he removes the rock from the well, and he feeds he waters, he provides water for the flock. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vaishak Yaakov leRachel, completely scandalous. He kisses this girl. He doesn't know her. He has not even introduced his name, right? He knows who she is because the other shepherds had said, here she comes. Vaisat kolo vaivach, and he raises his voice and he cries. And so here we have this love story of they're going to come together, the two halves, because he saw her and he immediately fell in love with her. It's got to be right, right? And so let's move into the story. Again, I'm moving fast because I just want to give you a survey, a brief sprinkling of some of the stories that bring up the myths and the narratives and how we could reread them. Vayehav, in the next page, verse 18, Vayehav Yaakov et Rachel, Vayomer evdecha sheva shanim. We generally don't ever hear about any man or woman with the verb vayehav in Tanakh. There isn't love between them. There's obligation, but there isn't love between an actual man and named man and woman in Tanakh. Vayehav Yaakov et Rachel, he loves her. He says, I'll pay whatever you want me to pay for this woman. 7 years? 7 years. And that's the arrangement. Vayavod berachel sheva shanim. So now here's the climax. He works for the 7 years, and he says, my 7 years are up, Lavan. We had this agreement that I was going to work for 7 years, and then I get the prize, my other half. And so Lavan says, okay, you're right. The 7 years you fulfilled. He gathers the town. He makes a big wedding feast. Vahi ba'erev, like we all know how the trajectory goes. Pasuk Chav Gimel 23. ויהי בערב ויקח את לאה ביתו, ויבא אותה אליו, ויבוא אליה. And at night, He does not bring Rachel as he is promised. He brings Leah. And Leah, we had heard about further up in verse 17. We don't know what's wrong with Leah, actually. It just says her eyes, and it's translated in so many different ways, fair, crying, teary-eyed. But we just know that whatever Leah is, it's not as good as Rachel because she was beautiful. So she's juxtaposing. We don't know what's up with Leah, but it's not as good as Rachel. And so here we have, if you could just imagine for a minute, what kind of moment of passion it is for Yaakov. And if we could just imagine the three tents. There's a tent that Lavan is in with his wife, as happy as could be. He got the best 2-for-1 deal, right? And then we have Rachel, who knows exactly what's going on in the tent next door with Yaakov, and her sister Leah, and she knows what she's given up. And then we have Leah and Yaakov. Yaakov has no idea that he is with Leah. Leah knows that she's with Yaakov, and so all the passionate and longing crying out that Yaakov has for Rachel, Leah knows it's not intended for her. Yaakov thinks he's speaking to Rachel. We have so many different levels of betrayal, of misunderstanding in this ideal passionate love story. And then, of course, he discovers in the morning, Chafei v'hi beboker. You know, I heard once an Israeli, Meir Shalev, an Israeli writer, it's such a great line. He said, maybe I shouldn't say this at a singles event. He says, v'hi beboker v'hineh hi Leah. And he wakes up Yaakov in the morning, and he sees it's Leah. And Meir Shalev says, everyone goes to bed with Rachel and wakes up with Leah. And he sees it's Leah. Now, of course, rightfully he's enraged, right? I mean, he just had the love of his life, the night of his life. This is after 7 years, and he's been cheated, and he's been tricked. And then we know what happens, and he goes to Lavan, and Lavan says, you're right, but we don't do it this way in our town, that the youngest goes before the oldest. So you can have the youngest now, finish up your 7 days of wedding party, and then you'll get the youngest. And that's what happens with the agreement that he would stay another 7 years, which he does. And then when he's with Rachel, in Pasuk Lamed, after all of that, ויבוא גם אל רחל ויאהב גם את רחל מלאה. And so he comes now and he is with Rachel, and he loves her still more than Leah. He has something to compare to. And he loves her more, and his love is clearly, his passionate love is for Rachel, and he works those 7 additional years. And so here's the perfect love story, the ideal love story. We met, we knew it, chemistry, immediate, right? And it doesn't work out, but we all still somehow believe in the Rachel and Yaakov myth. We believe that when we're going to meet the right person, it's going to be like that, and it's going to stay like that because it was the right person, it's my other half. In fact, the one woman in Tanakh that demonstrates for us that she's a woman who has come into her own, who is strong, who does know herself, that woman is Miriam. But ironically, we never hear about her husband, and we never hear what her marriage is like. And so the model of a woman who's living into her full self, we actually don't get to hear about what her relationship is like. We get to hear about the fullness of her life. I gave you the verses here. She's the one who takes the women out and dance in exact language as Moshe in the Shirah. And she's rewarded by being the power who brings them water later on in the desert. So she's a woman who's come into her full self, but she, ironically, we don't know how her relationship has worked out. And so I want to end, on the very last page, I want to end with the idea that we can read our tradition in the way that we traditionally always had it fed, and that is that there's 2 halves that make a whole, and we could keep on searching for the 2 halves. But in reality, as we very briefly and superficially have seen, it is really about 2 wholes coming together to live in harmony. And in the last 2 sources here in Mishlei, it says, Barzel bebarzel yachad. One knife can't sharpen another knife unless that knife is sharp already. And so when you think about going out to date and to meet someone, you need to be whole. You can't come into harmony with another person unless you are a sharpened knife. And with that, I want to end, and I promised you that I would tell you this. What did God guard Gan Eden with when he threw them out? He guarded them with the Kolvim. What does the Gemara tell us about the Kolvim? Whenever Israel came up to the temple for the festivals, the curtain of the Beit HaMikdash would be removed, and the Kolvim would be shown to them, and their bodies would be intertwined with one another, and they would say to them, look, you are beloved before God as the love between man and woman. What was the Gan Eden guarded with? It was guarded with the Kolvim, who were intimate, who were in the sexual act of intimacy, which is the same way that God guarded the Holy of Holies. What does that tell us, right? Just we are beloved in the same way. We can be whole with God, or we could be whole with another man, only if we are whole within ourselves. And so I want to end off by saying that I want you to think about, to really reconsider and think about the idea, the mythological idea that we've always been told that you're going to somehow put these two pieces of puzzle together, and instead have the healthier approach of saying, I need to be whole myself in order to come together to live in harmony with someone else. Okay, thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.